So, good morning and welcome to this video. Today is the day after Nikon announced the release of the Z9. Fabulous news. Not that I'm going to be buying one, but it just prompted me to think, well, maybe I should do a video, and I haven't done one, about why I've got this camera, the background to it, why I love it, why I'm using it for weddings this year, what lenses I'm using, and how this kind of all fits into the release of the Z9. But it's largely going to be a review of the D780. So this is a D780, which I've now had for 3 months. I've managed to do one wedding. This is lockdown, of course. Two weddings, sorry. A couple of boudoir shoots, a family shoot, and 2 portfolio shoots. So I've used it a reasonable bit. Let me give you my background briefly. I don't want to bore you, but let me give you my background so that you can put this into perspective. So I've been professional now for about 8 years. I've used Nikon for about 20 years. But just over 2 years ago, in fact, what date are we talking? October 18. Nikon announced the Z6 mirrorless camera, and more than that, in the 9 months before that, Sony had released the A7iii, finally released a 24 megapixel full frame camera, which was absolutely stunning. Brilliant autofocus, face detect, eye autofocus. Everyone raved about it, and mirrorless became the way to go. So I was using a D750 at the time, through 2018. Got to about October and Nikon announced the Z6. So I went to my local camera store. It's about 80 miles away. But anyway, I went there for about 15-20 minutes, played with the Z6. I was really disappointed before I even got there, because I knew it only had 1 card slot. It didn't have a battery grip available. The early reviews of the pre-production models weren't very encouraging. I think it may have had face detect, but it certainly didn't have eye autofocus or anything like that. So I got there, picked the thing up, and immediately felt not at home with it. The problem was it was small. This is what I'm used to. D700, you know, a normal DSLR type body. That's what I've been using for 20 years. 20 years since digital came out. And before that, film with Nikon. And it just felt so small. The buttons were very close together. I haven't got big hands, but I still thought it was going to be much more difficult to use. Bear in mind, most of what I do is weddings, so I'm very used to having that there, changing settings, pressing buttons, and doing things really quickly, and kind of walking along, talking to the bride and groom, and while I'm doing that, sort of pressing buttons without even looking at the camera, and just changing settings, ready for the next shot. And I didn't feel that the Z6 was going to give me that. But of course the big deal breaker was the 1 card slot. So I left there a bit disappointed, very disappointed, and made the decision on the way back that if mirrorless is the way to go, then it's going to have to be with Sony. A month later, I'd sold most of my Nikon gear apart from the D700 on 1 lens, which I haven't got now. It's the 50mm 1.4 I had. I've changed everything to Sony. I went and picked the Sony up. It was second hand, but only by about 2 months. I think it had probably done about less than 1,000 shots. It came with a kit 24 to 105 lens. I got home, and I remember the feeling when I took the thing out of the box, because this was the first time I picked up the Sony A7iii. Took it out of the box, popped the lens on the front, and thought, crap, this doesn't feel very nice at all. It felt totally unbalanced. when you pick this up, this has got the 85 lens on, so it's a reasonable size, fairly heavy lens, but it feels balanced. It just works. It feels like it was designed to be like this. The Sony felt like someone had chopped the bottom off the camera, and it just felt so small. I'm trying to sort of hold it like that, and got this whacking great lens on the front, and when you wound the thing out to 105 millimeters, so it was quite long, it was just ridiculous. You could barely pick the thing up. I'm exaggerating, but it was, you get the idea. It wasn't great. The buttons were even smaller than the Z6, even closer together, and I knew there and then that it was going to take, I'd have to climb a mountain to get to the point where I could be as familiar with it as I was with a Nikon DSLR. However, I bought it, that was what I had now. I love the image quality. I love the image quality in some ways. It had great dynamic range. I wasn't mad on the colours. I don't like the Sony colours as much as the Nikon. And there was just something, I don't know, they were really sharp, crisp, clear photos. Probably something to do with the lenses I had as well. They didn't kind of, I don't know. Certainly if I look at the D700 images, they just come across as having emotion, feeling, depth. There's just something about them that's kind of artistic. The Sony wiped all that out, and it was just a smartphone. It was just a super duper smartphone picture. That's what I thought. Anyway, I then bought 3 prime lenses, the 35, 50 and the 85, all 1.4, and that's what I shot weddings with for 2 years. I got really used to the IAF. It took me months and months, literally about 4 months and probably 8 or 9 weddings to get the Sony set up so that I could use it at a wedding and feel comfortable and not get mixed up with the buttons, not have to start diving into the menu to do things. It's very customizable. You can change the buttons to do all sorts of different things, but that in a way is a bit of a problem, because you then have to remember, now what have I programmed this to? And once you start messing around and you try different options of programming different buttons to do different things to see what works best, it takes weeks of use to get used to the fact that, oh, this button, hold on, now that used to be so and so, what have I made that button now? And it really does take a lot of practice. Whereas obviously something like a Nikon, it's not as programmable, but the buttons are there that do the job that they need to do. Anyway, I got to the, obviously during 2020 we've had coronavirus and lockdown, and I haven't done that many weddings last year. I think I probably did 8 or 9 weddings. Still did quite a lot of boudoir, family shoots and that kind of thing in between lockdowns. But made a decision that I didn't want to go into 2021, this year, with the Sony. I wanted to get back to a proper camera. I just couldn't stand the Sony ergonomics and it's just the use of it. I didn't come into my office here and think, oh, I want to go out and take some photos, not for paid work, but just for me. I would always pick up the D700. Never the Sony. The Sony I used if someone was paying me, but other than that, I really much preferred the D700. So I decided for this year, for 2021 onwards, I was back with Nikon, and I wanted a proper camera again. I wasn't going to go mirrorless, because all manufacturers for some reason seem to have this obsession with making mirrorless cameras so bloody small you can't hold the things properly, and you can't use them properly at something like a wedding. They just don't feel like professional cameras. I think the Z6 II and the Z7 II, not that I've picked those up, they're very similar to the Z6. They have got 2 card slots, so that I would now consider using them at a wedding. And maybe if they had a grip, that would make them more holdable. I think the buttons are still a little bit crammed together because the whole body is that much smaller. Just one example, let me tell you. A Nikon DSLR has got a button here, the the focus lever button. You can press that in and you can change the focus area. Just press that in, wind the wheel, and you change the focus area. That's missing. It's certainly missing on the Z6. I think it's missing on the Z7 II and Z6 II as well. I can just hold that up, press that in, spin the wheel, and I've changed the focus mode. I can go from auto area to single point to 3D tracking, whatever I want. I believe on the Z cameras you've got to program a button to do exactly what we've already got on this old camera. So old certainly isn't necessarily out of date. It's very usable. So when I made the decision to change back to, and excuse me, I should be sticking to my script here. I think I have. Yeah, seem to be sticking to it. So when I made the decision to come back to Nikon, what was I going to buy? As I say, the new Z6 II, because it had 2 card slots and a battery grip, a battery grip that was allegedly going to have some buttons on it so you could actually use it. I could use that, but the problem is, and I knew this from when I was back with Nikon previously with the D750 and D800 and all the other things I had before that, I love the D lenses. And I've actually still got one that's going to arrive in the next couple of days, this one here on the screen. I've made a video about this actually some weeks ago. It's the 135 f2D defocus lens, and that will complete my lineup of lenses, which is 85, 35 f2, 18 to 35, a 50 millimeter Sigma 1.4, and then the 135. Apart from the Sigma, they all are D lenses, and they therefore all rely on the camera for focusing. They haven't got their own focus motors. But I love these lenses over the newer G lenses. The reason being, I find these more artistic. Yep, sure, the G lenses, they're not actually sharper. If you look at the center sharpness of a D lens and a G lens, in the center, this is certainly as sharp, if I would argue on a couple of these lenses possibly sharper. That 135 is bonkersly sharp in the middle, but they lose the sharpness as you go out towards the edge. I'm shooting at 1.4. What's the point of shooting at 1.4? I want the outside, I want the background to be out of focus. I have no care whatsoever whether it's sharp at the edges. I'm not a landscape photographer or an architectural photographer. I photograph people, and the D lenses are just so much more gorgeous than the G lenses for that, I think. I think the G lenses, there's not a huge difference, but the G lenses are much more modern in the look they give you to the photos. The D lenses for weddings, I think, are much more suitable for photographing people in general, and certainly for boudoir and that sort of thing, much better. So if I change to a mirrorless camera, I'm going to have to dump my D lenses and go to G lenses or to the Z mount lenses, which I'm not going to be particularly happy about. So going back to the release of the Z9, I read a rumour, in fact I read it a few weeks ago, that they're going to come up with not just the F to Z mount adapter, so you can use G lenses on the mirrorless cameras, but they're going to come up with a D to Z adapter, so you can use D lenses on the mirrorless camera. Now, when that happens, if that happens, then I might consider going to mirrorless, because I can see a few advantages, and they really are just a few advantages. I guess the EVF instead of the OVF, for me it's really close. I love the viewfinder on this, in fact on most Nikons, and having used the EVF on the Sony for 2 years, yeah, I can compare the two, and there's really not much difference. Sometimes I prefer an EVF, sometimes I prefer an OVF. No one's yet come up with a switch which can switch between the two. So anyway, why did I choose the D780 when I was making the choice about which Nikon to get after changing from Sony? D850. Do I really want all those megapixels? And this is another problem with the Z9, which is going to be probably 45-50 megapixels, even if I built that. Do I want that at the wedding? That's going to give me so much data storage. I don't need that many megapixels. Simple as that. It's going to slow down Lightroom. I'm going to have to probably buy a new computer and more plug-in disk drives and all this sort of thing. 24 megapixels for me, for weddings, for 2021, 22, possibly 23, is perfect. Maybe at some point in the future that will change. At some point I'm going to have to change the computer, and maybe then that will make life easier and will make 45-50 megapixels more realistic. So the D850, wasn't an ideal candidate. We've got the D4. I probably couldn't run to the cost of a D5. A D4, yeah, that would be good. And I certainly did consider that. That was certainly an option. Going back to a D750 2 years later felt like a really backward step. I really didn't want to go back to a D750. And then I checked out the D780, which is the mix between a DSLR and mirrorless, of course. And I checked out all the reviews, and there really aren't that many reviews around. And I went again to my local camera store, tried one out, and absolutely loved it. Let me explain why, what the whole point of this video is. And I'm sorry I've been rambling on, but I hope it's all been useful stuff. Why do I love it? Well, first of all, it takes D lenses, obviously, so that makes for a great combination. It feels like a proper camera. It's a photographer's tool. It fits, it works, the buttons all are in the right place, they're the right size. It's just a lovely thing to use. When I first got this, I did actually walk around the house just carrying the thing because it's just so nice. It's just nice. I love it. The biggest feature, of course, is the mix of the OVF, the Optical Viewfinder, with Live View, which they say, it is said, comes from the Z6. I don't believe that. I believe the Live View and the focusing, the exposure and everything else is taken from the Z6 too. The reason I say that is using Live View and using the face tracking and the eye autofocus, it is absolutely superb. It is, I would dare to say, it's as good as the Sony A7iii. The Z6 was dreadful until they did, I forget what the update was called, but there was an update to the Z6 which added eye autofocus and it made it better. But it was, from what everyone says, nowhere near as good as the Sony A7iii. This is as good as the A7iii. I've used it, as I say, at a couple of weddings and other shoots, and it really does work brilliantly. So having that facility to be able to choose between a mirrorless system and a DSLR system is brilliant, because there are times when an optical viewfinder, for me, works better than an EVF, as I said earlier. The focusing system through the OVF is from a D5, I'm told. It's not quite the same, it hasn't got the processing that the D5 has, but it's better, noticeably better than a D750. Tracking is amazing. Face detect through the viewfinder works reasonably well. I'm not sure I would trust it at a wedding, but for things like family shoots and boudoir and all the other things where you've got a little bit more time and you can take the shot and just check it, that works really, really well. The exposure metering is better than the D750, and the reason it is because whilst the exposure is and always has been, if you're using spot metering, it's linked to the focus point. What Nikon have now done with this, and I don't know if they've done it with the D850 or not, but with this, is in matrix metering, the meter is biased towards where the focus point is and towards where any faces are. So if you've turned on, I forget what the actual wording is now, but if you've turned on in the menu face detect in live view, in the optical viewfinder, it will bias the exposure towards faces, and I just actually checked this out. I can remember on my Nikon D750 of taking, I've got a model with a face on it, and I took it into my lounge, stood it in front of the window so that the face detect and the eye autofocus works, and through the viewfinder on the D750 in matrix mode, if that was supposed to bias towards faces and the focus point, it really didn't. It tended to get the exposure completely wrong, and you would have to get really close to a face so that it was almost filling the screen before you got the correct exposure. This, absolutely spot on. I can photograph someone with the 85 lens so that I've got sort of their top half and the face, so I'm a fair way back from them. I've got a really bright window behind them, and it exposes for their face. It is spot on. Obviously it means the window is completely blown out, whereas on the D750 it would try and get some sort of balance in between, so the window wasn't blown out but the face was really dark. This does what I want it to do. I want the face correctly exposed, maybe just slightly biased towards what the background is, but not so that I have to do much work in Lightroom afterwards. And this does it perfectly. It just gets it right, which is important because at weddings, quite often, if I'm taking shots, bride and groom at the ceremony, say, they could be backlit. There could be a huge, great window behind them. And that means on the D750 and, in fact, on the Sony, I had to use spot metering, get the spot over their face, hit the exposure lock, and all that kind of stuff. Well, with this, I can just leave it all the time on matrix metering, knowing that it's going to get the faces, or whatever I'm focused on, correct. Just makes life a lot easier. Now, I don't use video a lot. I've been using it more at weddings. I've tended to use either this camera or even a mobile phone with video. I mean, they do 4K these days. It's not a big part of what I do at weddings, but I've decided that for this year onwards, I'm going to be using this for video clips, because I can switch. So in live view, I'm in nothing at the moment because I've got that lens filter. I can go from stills to video with that. One click and I'm now in video, and it's a completely separate menu, completely separate settings. So I can program this to do exactly the video I want it to do, different focus area, different exposure method, all that kind of stuff. It does that. I can hit the video, I can take, my plan is that I'll be taking 10-15 second video clips and then going back to stills, completely different settings, and I can continue using stills if I want, or I can go to the OVF just with another button press. It's very versatile, and for me is the ideal solution to what I was looking for. So that's why I've chosen the D750, and I will be using this for all of this year. The Z9, when it comes out, it looks like it's going to be what I believed Nikon should have done with the Z6. Certainly the Z6 II and the Z7 II. They should have made it, in my opinion, more like this size. They should basically have made the D780, put an EVF in, and that would be their mirrorless camera. I think certainly many more professional photographers, and Nikon, I've always felt Nikon were more biased towards professional photographers, whereas Canon and Panasonic and all the other people were more biased towards enthusiast photographers. So I think Nikon and professionals would have preferred a mirrorless camera of this kind of layout, this sort of size, so just stick an EVF in there and you're done. And that kind of basically looks like what the Z9 is going to be. It looks like it's going to be maybe a tiny bit smaller than this, but then it's going to have the vertical grip, so it's going to be a proper size camera, thank goodness, finally. But of course the problem's going to be it's going to be £6,000, $6,500, something like that. That's a huge step. I've got to do a lot of weddings to recover that amount of money. And what does it do that this doesn't do? I don't need 8K video, I don't need 20 frames a second, etc, etc. The autofocus on this is perfectly way above what is needed for a wedding, for boudoir, for family shoots. So for me as a professional, that is the answer to my needs for this year, probably for the next year, maybe the year after. Unless they come out with a D to Z adapter, as I say, in which case I might possibly consider change. No, I'm going to keep that. I would see if I got a Z6 II, it would be in addition to this, not to replace this, not for some time anyway, because I absolutely love this camera. That's not been a technical, in-depth review by any means. It wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be an insight into the ramblings of my brain, which I hope it has been. For some people, the D780 is going to be the solution. If you're wondering about what camera, do think about the D780. It is, I promise you, it is a wonderful camera. There is down below, I've put some links to some previous videos about the D700, about D lenses, that kind of stuff. And of course, if you want to get any future ones, please subscribe and hit the bell, and you'll get notified of any future videos I do. Thanks for watching. Cheers for now.